It's been a unique spring for all, with everybody trying to salvage the incoming summer. For members of our black community, this period has been testing, trying, tiring and demoralizing, and I'm not even talking about the coronavirus, which I accept has taken so many lives and livelihoods. I'm talking about the recent high-profile murders of our brothers and sisters, and I'm going to emphasize murders because that's what they were. The treatment of black people has been savagery, inhumane and illegal for as long as we can all remember, but things have to change. But now we've seen the reaction, protests, public anguish, and some hard and honest questions are being asked about the world that we live in. And people like me have suggested that this feels different, and opportunities are rising to really enforce change and really make a difference to ensure that black people can not only thrive and prosper, but just go to the shops to get their groceries and come back alive. But others are more cynical, and I understand why. But I think it's important on platforms like this at Blakademik TV that we offer hope without being deluded. So what I want to discuss with my panel today is how can we turn this recent activism and energy into actual tangible change. What's happening, people? Welcome to It's All Blakademik Live with your host, myself, Jordan Jarett-Bryan. We are at Joke Fest 2020. I want to say a big thank you for the guys having us back here again. For obvious reasons, things are a little bit different this year. No audience, no fantastic crowd, but we will be doing more of these shows in the next year, I'm sure. Back to better times with you fantastic people once again. We're going to be having a really good discussion today about tangible change, moving on from a lot of the talk and the energy and activism that we've all been seeing and experiencing from within the black community and beyond over the last month or so. And to do so, I've got a fantastic panel with me here today. I'm joined by Keme Nzerem, a broadcaster and journalist of 20 years Channel 4 News. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, pleasure to be here.
Good, thanks for joining me here today. I'm also joined by Dr. Diahanne Rhiney here, who is the founder of Baton Awards, which celebrates black women and women also from other ethnicities as well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And I've also got Tessy Ojo, who's the CEO of the Diahanne Awards here, which empowers and educates young people. How are you?
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So, before we get into the discussion around what's wrong, but more so solutions and how we can change and turn this energy into action, I'm very conscious that for the last month it's been very emotional for members of our community. From what we've seen, the deaths to COVID, it's been a very emotional period. So I want to ask all three of you, first of all, how you're feeling. So I think it's very important that we kind of express how we've been feeling this last kind of month or so. I'll start with you, Keme. Tell us a little bit about, as a black man, how you felt this last few weeks.
I felt exhilarated and excited, but also exhausted. And I think one of the reasons for that in the media world, for very good reasons, people, our own community, and white Britons who perhaps for whatever reason have not had to or wanted to engage with the lived daily challenges of being a person of colour. And I embrace my brown cousins and brothers and sisters in that. They are now asking us, to a greater or lesser degree, about our experiences. And a lot of people are interested. But there are risks that come with that, because we are oftentimes being asked to surface traumas that are hard to talk about. And I think if the parallel that society has learnt about talking to women who have survived sexual violence is to be learned, we rightly put a lot of care around that in terms of, for example, in a legal sense, anonymity, but just on a basic one-to-one sense, people are very careful about asking about their experiences and give women who have been through that awful experience an opportunity to say, I don't want to talk about it, it's too traumatic. But we're not quite there yet. I don't think that care is there yet for black and brown people. We're asked, well, tell me about your experiences of racism, without knowing that it's really difficult, and that's tiring. And I'd be really keen to know how other people have experienced that mixture of exhaustion, elation, exasperation, excitement, because all of those emotions are present for me.
Tessy, what about yourself? How have you felt? I mean, we're coming out the back end, hopefully, of what's been a very triggering month or so. How are you feeling as a black woman?
I think it was a little bit of what was just said. I think for many people, many black people in this country and in the US, these are conversations that you have in your homes all the time. These are everyday things that happen. You know, you debrief yourselves at home. For me, when I have children at university, when we call them to check on them, you always ask them those questions. Are you okay? Was anything exhausting? Or, you know, you have all these conversations sort of in your own households. In some way, what happened with the whole movement was just it felt like you were inviting, everyone else was invited to be part of this conversation, which was incredible in some way, because one, I didn't see that coming. I didn't see that as a global world, we would actually have these conversations so openly. So in some way, it was, I don't want to use the word exciting because that's not what it is, but it was great to be able to have all of these conversations publicly. And for once, people outside of Black families begin to listen and understand, or maybe even hear in the first place that this happens. I remember being in so many other meetings and saying to people, how many of you have I have a 20-year-old son, and I don't know how old he was when we began to have those conversations about what stop and search could look or feel like for him as a Black boy. And just beginning to have those conversations, telling your colleagues or your friends or on the wider platform, like on socials, begin to say, these are conversations that I've had in my household since my son was XY age. And certainly people realizing that, you know, for once, when we talk about parity, you know, people have this false sense that everyone's equal. And I think certainly for those who genuinely wanted to engage with this topic, realize that actually you might be whatever class you might be, as a Black person, you might be middle class, whatever, you are still you know, you don't actually have parity when it comes to your colleagues. And I think that realization, for me, people beginning to engage with that conversation and that realization was huge, was fundamental, because I think we can't achieve change if you're not seen or heard. And I think for the first time, I felt that as a global world, or at least here in the UK, we were having conversations that had happened in the privacy of so many homes for hundreds of years. So in that way, it felt like, yes, it was exhausting, sometimes having to, I remember having a few conversations where people were like, so tell me your experience. And at one point I said, actually, I'm not, you know, these are a list of books, go and read. But what was important was anyone who genuinely wanted to engage, I wanted to be able to engage with them, but also protecting my own mental well-being, because at some point it got exhausting just going through it over and over again. Even with my children, you know, they're in their 20s now, and sometimes they began to even recall experiences that we never knew as parents that they had experienced. And that was emotionally tough as parents to hear that your child who goes to maybe a great university had experienced stuff that you couldn't even protect them from. So, you know, it had its positive, but also on one hand, I can't take away the emotional turmoil it was for a lot of Black families.
I want to touch on that point, Dr. Rhiney, about did you find this last month almost cathartic and being able to have a space where you could speak about how you felt and racism generally, or did you find it exhausting constantly being asked, how are you, and having to constantly talk about how you felt during the period where there were so many high-profile killings of Black people?
I felt exhausted, but I also felt frightened, because I've always spoke about racism. I'm got a big mouth, and I've always spoken about it. And in our household, it's something we deal with on a daily basis. But I was frightened because when you have children and they are, one of them comes to you crying and really saying, I don't understand. They killed someone because of the colour of this. That was the hardest part for me. It's that I want to go and protest. No, we can't do that. Why not? You know. So in some ways, it made you happy that they get it, but sad that they have to still get it. You'd think in 2020 we would have moved on even slightly more. So it was exhausting. I had to have a few days just to myself of quietness, because I don't think we realise that trauma relived over and over again. It really does affect your mental health, and that's my area of specialty. I'm a psychologist, so you know, for me, it was like I need to protect my mental health, the children's mental health, and it was amazing that people who you've known for many years, you know, some people would call them white allies, would message me and say, "I'm so sorry. How are you feeling?" And part of you think that's really nice and sensitive for them to come out in that way. And then part of me was angry, thinking, you really didn't know that there was a difference?
I found that interesting as well, how many white people genuinely didn't understand what it was. I understand that white person will never fully understand, because I don't think
you can. Yeah, but I agree.
It was a lot of naivety that I kind of was getting back from a lot of white people about, oh really, that it took someone having to die on, you know, having someone's knee on their neck for them to realise, oh wow, okay, so you guys are treated differently by the police. And I found that quite surprising.
Yeah, and and it's amazing. She came to me and said, I just feel so bad about my white privilege, and there's nothing I can do because I'm white. I just automatically get it, you know. And it was those conversations I found interesting but exhausting.
And you know, Jordan, you started this by saying you wanted to come out of this chat with an understanding of what needs to change and what needs to stick. And drawing on, I think, what both of our other very eminent contributors have said, that expectation that white society now has that we share these traumas, well, actually, I think the expectation needs to change. And people who don't get it need to do some reading before they ask us how we feel. They need to have read Rennie, they need to have read Afua, they need to have read Akala, they need to have read David Alashoga, just so they've got some intellectual-based understanding of what we're going through. And from there, perhaps their questions will be, perhaps sometimes they won't need to ask because they'll be there in presence, in physical presence. And so I would like people out there, our white allies, to up their knowledge game. Do your own reading, as well as try and engage with us in a sensitive way, in a supportive way. And sometimes we're not going to want to talk about it, right? Because it is too difficult.
You both actually have noticed you said both referred to white allies and done the quotation marks. So I'm assuming that it's not a term that you're overly comfortable with. Why?
For me, some of the supposed white allies have still got an agenda, and it suits them to be white allies because it helps their progression in whatever they're doing to not appear to be racist.
Give me an example.
So, you know, it's like in the corporates at the moment, oh my God, the amount of emails and all of a sudden take my awards, yeah? Started 3 years ago, and you'd go to corporates and they'd like, oh yeah, you know, maybe give it a few years, all this nice softly. At the moment, they're the best thing since sliced bread. And it's like, oh, because you want your logo to make it look like you understand. You understand. No, you don't. It's still a PR stunt. So I use the word white ally loosely because not all, but there are a lot of people who I think have got a different agenda.
And Tessy, is that an experience that you in the corporate world have experienced as well? Do you get a sense, are you quite cynical about how much the corporate world cares about black pain and black experiences?
So one of the things I vowed to do once this whole global movement kicked off, I wanted to remain optimistic. I realized that I had a platform and access to people who could bring change from legislative point of view. And so I've literally got my mission. I'm on a mission to move away from any form of allyship that's just performative and go into tangibilities. So I'm completely on that mission. And in that sense, um, I'm not just waiting on people to simply say, this is what we are going to do or put up great statements. I'm literally everywhere that I have the ability to, like, one of the things we started off straight after was we created a campaign that's called Young and Black. And firstly, what we wanted to do with that campaign was create a story sharing platform where young and black people can share their stories of experiences of race in the UK. The purpose of this was we wanted to collate all of these stories and present it to ministers to hear firsthand. I don't want, I remember the Prime Minister when, I think Marcus, I can't remember his last name now, the footballer who was wanting to create change in terms of
Marcus
Rashford, or children having vouchers during the summer holiday. And when the Prime Minister came up eventually, he said he hadn't heard about it and it only came to his attention that day. And so when it came to his attention, he did something. Now, for me, Young and Black platform is about saying, once we gather the stories of hundreds and hundreds of young and black people, we are presenting these platforms to ministers so they can hear firsthand. And that takes away, and then we can go on to say, then so what? So in some way, I'm kind of not allowing room or not going to allow room for anyone to simply be an ally just by performance. I want action. I want tangible changes, and so that whole I'm working across 4 government departments right now: civil society, education, Home Office, and DWP. Really, those 4 key areas where young people have constantly talked about being disproportionately affected. And for us, it's about, okay, how can we make something tangible? Because things are not going to change just by a company having the goodwill to do something good. What happens next year? If we don't have the way we've always created change in this country, is legislative. And when legislation happens, that's tangible change. So it's great. I'm not dismissing the fact that it's great that lots of companies are coming up with great statements right now on how they are going to become allies. That's great. I want to see all of that happen. But I want much more than that, because when the noise goes down, suddenly the performance reduces, and we can't take the chance of that happening.
I hear that. The 3 main areas I want to focus on, guys, are media, education, and business and finance. So let's start with media. Keme, you broke the story a few weeks ago of Patrick Hutchinson, who was the gentleman who, I will say, saved another man from an ill fate during the protests a couple of weeks ago. He was the famous image of him carrying this man over his shoulders to safety. What did you make of how Patrick was perceived by the media, and what lessons can media learn going forward about how they portray, in particular, dark-skinned black men?
Sure. So that image created a huge amount of interest. And as you say, we interviewed Patrick the morning after. And I can't speak for the other interviews that he subsequently did with other outlets. But I know from talking to black colleagues that many were disappointed and upset that a lot of the coverage used a very clumsy trope of white forgiveness. That here was a strong, ebony black male effectively forgiving the white racist. I haven't spoken to Bryn Male, the person he rescued. I don't know if he was a racist, but it has been suggested that he was affiliated with Millwall and all the things that go with that. And so it has been suggested the reason that image resonated so powerfully with Middle England is that Middle England wishes to seek forgiveness for its own racism. And in seeing Patrick Hutchinson save Bryn, he was forgiving them. In our coverage, we made it very clear, because we interviewed not just Patrick, but his 4 security colleagues. They made it very clear they weren't saving Bryn Male. They had gone to that protest as black elders because they knew there was a likelihood of trouble, and they were very worried that if it did kick off, women and children who were there may have needed to be protected, but also if a white person had ended up being very badly hurt or worse by a group of young black men, we all know where that story ends. They were not saving that man. They were saving the futures of the young black men who could have been involved in that incident, and the criminal justice system would not have understood the antecedent events. So if I can just move on to a point that we were addressing a second ago about white allyship. There is a fear that story resonated with people, not with white people, not as a productive, progressive moment that we can learn from, but just that it absolved their sins. However, when I look at my family and my network, my mother's white, a white American. My wife is white. I went to a mixed school. Lots of my friends, I move in a very mixed world. And in talking about this with my wife, who understood the fears that a lot of black people had about why this imagery was so potent, she said, well, actually, you know what? In her social media circles, she has seen a lot of white people taking something else from this image. Another thing that Patrick Hutchinson said was, if only the 3 officers that were standing by when George Floyd was killed, ended up dying, if only they had intervened, then maybe he would still be alive. And Kate said, actually, one of the takeaways from a lot of white people is, we have to intervene. We can no longer sit around and do nothing. So I think there is a message for everyone, not just media, but particularly for white people. Don't sit around. If you see something, if you hear something that doesn't sit right, challenge it. Speak up. Yeah, and and that speaking up can be as simple as, well, hang on, what do you mean by that? It doesn't need to be a confrontation. It can be a question. And that says to black people, okay, maybe this person, at least they're asking the question, at least they're challenging it.
Is it as simple to say that for media to really change in how it treats and represents and perceives black people, we just need more black people running those organisations? Is that ultimately where we need to get to a point where the BBC, Channel 4, ITV, all these broadcasters, newspapers, whatever media outlets, we just need more black people working in those positions that decide what photos in the front page,
commissioners,
what the headline is.
Yeah, I totally agree, because even just having a black presenter, it's you need to go to the top. You need more commissioners. You need the people who make the decisions to look like us. you know, because then they're seeing things with our eyes and then they're bringing a different perspective to the table. Obviously, that's what will happen. So when they know at the moment, and you've got like people like ITV saying, oh, we need a black presenter. No, that isn't the answer. And 32 years in, I mean, should be embarrassed to even say that.
Yeah, I think, you know, and I think on that point, it's the discussions that happen at a finer level. So going back to George Floyd, why on earth was he routinely described as an unarmed black man? Every time that phrase was used by reputable news organisations, the subtle inference is black men walk around with
guns. Yes, exactly.
Like, and clearly, weapon carrying in the States is not the same as it is here. But that word should never have been used in conjunction with George Floyd. He was a black man. Whether or not he had a weapon is not the story.
And do you know what else really disturbed me about the George Floyd situation was how many, and our program did it, we stopped early, continuously showed the video of point of death.
I can't watch it. I've not watched it, and I will not watch it.
I've seen it once by mistake because I don't watch the videos anymore. But what really disturbed me was how the BBC, the ITV, the Skies continuously showed the moment of death. And I just thought, A, showed its Ofcom rules around that anyway, but it said a lot to me about the value of black life. We can just almost show black men dying as almost entertainment to a degree. Tess, let me bring you back in here. The young people that you work with, I'm hoping you've got frozen, the young people that you work with, how many of them want to go into media and even new media, so they're not traditional formats of television or radio? Do many of the young people, what's their approach in trying to enter the media industry?
It's interesting because one of the things, that's a really interesting question. One of the things that we've observed a lot when it comes to young people is, I suppose prior to now, young people have almost began to create an alternative system. They are creating their own services, creating their own fashion, their own makeup, whatever industry that they are interested in. It felt like up until now, young people had, I suppose, accepted the fact that mainstream wasn't very accepting of them, and therefore had begun to create their own complete industry, which is fantastic. And you will see so many young people talk about entrepreneurs, I've set up this, I'm doing this. So there's that whole level of microeconomy that's done completely outside, separate, alongside mainstream, that suddenly this mainstream media or mainstream organizations would no longer be just pay lip service. It won't just simply be, oh, we're just going to have the one black token young black person here, and then that's it, we're done, we close up. And so I'm hoping, my hope is that as we move forward as society, that we will see much more representation, both on the telly and across industry. I tell you one bit that I really, talking about real change, one area that I'm desperate to see huge influx of young black people is in our education system. Because that's an area, yes, we don't see enough representation on our telly and all of that, but we can influence change hugely in the education system, particularly with children. No child is born racist. No child is born understanding that your skin color is more superior than this other person. It is taught somewhere. It's taught in the home. But also, if through our education system, nothing's changed, that narrative is in some way reinforced, education has to be priority.
Dr. Ryan, put that point to you. I mean, how do we change the system in terms of education? Is it as simple as changing the curriculum? Do we need more black teachers? Do we need black schools? If we're going to be in a country that isn't really, it's not our country, do we need to have more black schools? We do have some, but do we need to have institutions whereby we can trust what our kids are being taught benefits and empowers them? What's the answer to having a better education for young people?
I think, when it comes to education, you'll get people who say, we need to change the curriculum, and then you'll get them say, well, it is actually in the curriculum, because it is. Whether it's taught is another
So
thing, yes. And I think it has to come from, it's about legislation, it's about politics, it's not just, oh, let's just change the curriculum. Because if you look at things like Morehouse, you know, I remember when I went there and I was speaking there and I went there, I remember leaving and I cried. And people was like, why are you crying? I was like, because these young black men walk with purpose. It's the environment, it's how they're seen as valuable and equal. And it was just so unusual for me. So when I come back to England, I'm like my brother. My brother is highly intelligent, but when he was at school, it was like, oh, you know, he talks a lot, because he was bored. He was bored. And I just think until you get it, culture change is the hardest to change, because I do feel there are teachers who look at particularly young black boys and you see how they change when they get to secondary school. They do not give them that equal attention. They don't believe they can achieve. They'll speak to them about, do you want to be a mechanic? Why are you talking to them about being a mechanic? Why are you doing that? I mean, I remember when I was at school, and I wanted to major in English. I've always loved English. And the lady said to me, my English teacher said to me, do you guys speak English at home? I said, I beg your pardon?
Wow.
I beg your pardon.
I was laughing with exasperation.
But you know what she did for me? I did my English, I did A-levels when I was still at school. You know, I thought, I'm going to show you, how dare you? But what I'm saying is, if I was a different type of child, that could have crushed me.
So do we have any faith then that the conversations of the last few weeks and the last month or so has been attached quite closely to statues coming down, and education needs to be, you know, really focused on in teaching everybody in the country about Britain's real past? Is the answer then to that we can rely on change in our schools because England now gets it? Or are you still quite cynical that we've got to do the work ourselves, which means the three of you are parents, that means when they come home, we've got to kind of almost unteach a lot of the nonsense that they're teaching?
I don't want to be unteaching my child. I pay my taxes. I want the school to do it.
So you think holding them accountable to do a better job rather than...
But that's still hard, don't you? I agree. I agree with you. But I have to accept, I came from a household where my mum was militant, you know, and we had Black Book. I truly believe if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. So when I walked out of my house, my mum always told me I come from kings and queens. So when you walk tall. And that was something that was so drummed into me at home that I just thought I could do anything. You can't tell me. So I think it's a combination of, yes, I pay my taxes, you teach them accordingly, but it does have to come from home as well. I think, 'cause you'll be shocked as much when you speak to people who look like us. They don't even know some of their core history. You know, they don't know.
Doesn't that argue then for the schools doing it? So just to
I agree.
So Jordan, earlier you said, you made a, I can't remember exactly the words you used, but it was about schools and education in a country that isn't really our country. This is my country.
So you see this as your country?
Of course it's my country. I built it. My mum and my father's Nigerian, my mother's American. This country is, believe it or not, it is a country of immigrants. The empire was built on extracting value from the rest of the world and focusing it here. This is our country.
It's not a country that's set up for black people.
No, so
even if we did build it.
Indeed. So the country needs to realise we have built this in every way that someone whose heritage goes back to Hampshire does. We have all built this together, and for that reason, there is a very strong need for the curriculum to change. I'll give you an example. My youngest daughter is 9. One of the assignments she recently had was to look at the Edwardian era. and we watched Titanic and stuff like that. It's all very interesting, and you know, it's actually quite a good film. I was surprised. I even cried.
5 hours.
It took us 3 sittings to get through it. But she said, but Dad, you know, like in terms of kind of world events, nothing really happened during the Edwardian era, did it? And I was like, well, nothing could be further from the truth. What has your school, and it's a good school, and I like them, and actually we've got good dialogue with them, but what have they taught you about what happened to the southeast of Nigeria, which is where my father comes from, in 1901? There was a big kingdom there, the Arrow people, that's our heritage. They were destroyed by the British because they were too powerful and they controlled far too many trade routes. Now, clearly, the UK has roots in all over the world, and I'm not really suggesting that every single little bit of heritage be taught, because that would be impossible. But the question that the students should be asked is, I'm not really, that this is what happened in the UK, right? But your challenge is to go and bring us a story from any part of the world that was connected with Britain during that era and explain how that contributes to British life, rather than a very, very focused Windsor Castle Parliament. You know, it's important we understand how this country works and how power works, but if we don't understand the wider picture of how all of us built this place, then we will continue to think that no other history matters. And then how will we look tall as kings and queens?
I want to move on, running short of time, I want to move to business and finance, guys. I'm interested to know, I mean, it was Black Pound Day launched last week. I'll start with you, Tessy. Black Pound Day was last week, initiative to get everybody, for that day, spending any money they would normally spend with a black-owned business or a black company. Is building an economic power base amongst the black community the only way black people are going to get tangible change going forward? Until we build weight economically, we're never really going to see the change. We can get more presenters on TV, we can get a few promotions here and there, but we're never going to really be in the positions of power to really have a say on the top table of business and politics.
If anything, if it's about raising awareness about, actually, when we talk about the curriculum and all the conversations we've just been having, where some people don't even understand that there's a whole different, you know, there are black-owned businesses in this country, some people have never seen it. That level of awareness that actually these people, and I use the word these people, are hardworking, are successful, contrary to what maybe the media doesn't show you. On some hand, I applaud that, and I think that's really great. I think it needs to be much more than that. It absolutely needs to be much more, because what we don't want, and what has always happened, is this parallel life that or world that we've set up, where you have, you know, if I can't get my hair products in this big fashion, this big company, because they don't understand the black buying power, let me set up my own business. And, you know, that's great. I applaud all of that. I do feel that at some point you know, the real change is in building one society that everyone has equality and parity. Real change is saying that my own child can aspire to be prime minister in this country that he was born and bred into, without waiting to be prime minister of a little micro country for only black people. Because firstly, he's British, he's a stakeholder in this country, he should not have to live a parallel life. That, for me, that's what my aspiration is, that we have a society that everyone has equality. Everyone can aspire. I always talk about the luxury of hope, that any child, irrespective of what family they're born into, should be able to hope for anything. And as long as they work towards it, that's usually called the American dream, that every child can dream, and that dream should be able to happen without necessarily, should be able to happen in this same society that we all live and work in.
How conscious are you of where you spend your money and why? Going forward, is this something you've always been conscious of in recent times? Are you more aware now of supporting black businesses?
I've always.
Okay.
I'm one of these people who've always done it. It's important to me. I agree with what my colleague says, and I that dream is wonderful. but I still think if that's going to happen in my time, I don't think so. And I would love to think that we're going to all be seen as equal and all this kind of thing. But I just think power like that, which we don't have, is never going to be given. I really just don't believe it's going to be given. It needs to be taken. And I think by becoming more financially astute as black people and investing in each other, and I mean, look, there's JN Bank UK, the first black bank, you know, has launched. Us having that, our own economy, like what I was saying about Tulsa in an article I wrote, you know, 100 years ago, nobody would know about Tulsa in the US and how much power they had. And the reason why they destroyed it is because they were becoming powerful. So I am very conscious. I deliberately support as and when I can. Obviously, the infrastructure still doesn't, I can't do it in everything, but I do think it's important.
I want to do a separate show on ownership. I think that's something that as a community we're lacking. I'm going to ask all three of you one question, different question each, and I just need a brief answer from the three of you as we wrap. Start with you, Keme. What does change look like to you?
Following on from the discussion we've been having about black business and the black pound, turkeys don't vote for Christmas, although there is the odd one. The chief executive of Reddit stepped down recently because he said he wanted his position to go to another black member of the SLT, the senior leadership team. And he said he did this because he has a black daughter and he wants her to know that there is a future for black business leaders. But what this actually speaks to is the need for all of us in organizations to put pressure on the leadership team in a very focused, dispassionate and targeted way. Ethnicity pay gap, black membership on the board and SLT, and black participation in key decision making. And this should be done without prejudice. It should be attached to management bonuses and management performance. And that discussion should happen in a very direct way. And black staff should know that they have the power and they should be empowered to do that without fear of this impacting on their career progression. In the same way, we are not on boards. We need to be on the board by saying to management, you're meeting with us, this is what we want, this is the timeline, tell us what you're going to achieve and when you're going to achieve it by.
You mentioned earlier on that nothing's going to change. Real change won't happen anytime soon. This is going to be something that's going to take a long time to happen. But in the next 6 months, give me one easy win, which you think, actually, no, that can change straight away, that would impact the lives of black people in this country.
I think if every black person in this country, whether it was £2, £5, I don't care, pound, put into a fund, a kitty or whatever, I think things could change very quickly.
Okay, I like that.
And as I say, my mum used to say, every mickle make a muckle.
I've heard that one as well. And Tessy, I'll finish with you. Just briefly, how long are you prepared to wait before you see change? How much time are you prepared to give before you want to start actually judging the talking that we've been having over the last month, the empathising or sympathising, should I say, from white people about, no, we need to do better. How long are you prepared to wait before you expect to see some tangible change?
Well, for me, I'm happy to have short, mid, and long-term goals. You know, there's some short-term quick wins. I want to see companies really showing what's happening, firstly empowering their black staff within all of their organizations. I want to see companies really owning, understanding doing a diversity audit. The simple audit is about looking at what is progression like for the black staff compared to their white colleagues. Is there discrepancies there? And then fix it. For me, that's short term. That's so quick. That's so easy. And that's something personally I'm championing within the charity sector, to have that done very quickly before the end of the year. That's short term. Anyone who can't do that right now, between now and the end of the year, is, you know, they're just playing. They're playing. They're not serious. Long term, midterm changes in the curriculum, that has to be paramount. I know the education system is trying to fix itself right now with kids being in lockdown for so long. That, for me, that's midterm education changes. Long term is big time legislation that I can't wait for at least a year to happen. Hopefully the Prime Minister, rather than creating a whole new review, there's lots of reviews that's happened. I want to see him implement the 11 race equality reviews that took place. I'm happy to wait a year to see that come to play. So there's 3 quick short-term, mid-term, and long-term things I want to see happen.
Listen, Tessy, Keme, and Dr. Rhiney, thank you very much, all 3 of you, for your time on It's All Blakademik live here today. Don't forget, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already done so. Blakademik TV on YouTube. Check out our website, blakademik.com, and also all of our socials across Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, where you can see all of our previous content and a little bit more about the team behind our production as well. Until next time, stay well. Peace.